It's the final weekend before the 2016 election. Have you been taking your blood pressure medication? Stay tuned for updates on the Richmond mayoral race and a settlement between the Dominion and the Department of Environmental Quality over an oil spill. We interviewed Gina Maglionico of the AFL CIO about the so-called Right to Work Amendment on this November's ballot. This and more on the For Virginia podcast. Thanks and welcome to the For Virginia podcast for the week ending November 5th, show number 12. 3 days to Election Day. It's almost over. God help us. I'm your host, Michael Brandon Wade. Thanks for tuning in. For Virginia is a state political action committee focused on supporting progressive causes and candidates at the local and state level. Our weekly podcast is meant to provide you with news and analysis of politics across the state, helping you get the information you need to be an informed citizen, battle right-wing propaganda, and to help progressives organize and activate where most needed. As always, I'd like to ask you to go to our website at forvirginia.org, where we'll be posting show notes with links to all the sources that we reference. Please share this podcast on social media and help us get the word out. We'd also like any feedback you have on ways we can improve the podcast and get information out to you. Please leave a comment on the video or email info@forvirginia.org or through Facebook if you're interested in helping the revolution in Virginia. And if you like what we're doing and would like to support us, please head on over to our Act Blue page to make a donation. And thank you for all your support. As always, we like to start the show with a recap of old news over the past week, stories we've covered before. Top of the cake this week has to go to the Richmond's mayor race. We've talked at length about Joe Morrissey and his improprieties and the accusations that have been made against him with regards to sexual misconduct, to say the least. Washington Post actually had an opinion article that called Morrissey Richmond's Anthony Weiner. I've said he's more like Donald Trump, but I guess if you combine Trump and Weiner together, there you have it. Probably the big news is that Morrissey won't be charged with a crime regarding allegations that he propositioned a client to his law office. And Rico County's Commonwealth Attorney Shannon Taylor said that Morrissey will not face criminal charges. Quote, while what he did was wrong and unethical, there will not be a prosecution, according to a statement. No word yet from the Virginia State Bar Association as to whether this will lead to disbarment. They are currently still investigating Morrissey. Defense of 2014 charges of contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Won't get into all that again tonight. We've covered it week after week after week. Basically, Morrissey was caught exchanging sex with a 17-year-old woman that worked for him, blamed it on her ex-boyfriend, saying that his phone was hacked, basically. He since married the woman. They have 2 children together. And I believe last week, Myrna Morrissey had to kick reporters out of her home after her husband acknowledged that he did send inappropriate texts to the woman accusing him of the improper behavior. So the other big news out of Richmond is that the field has thinned somewhat. I believe at one point there were 8 candidates for mayor. News this week that Richmond City Councilman John Bailey's is dropping out of the mayoral bid, citing concerns that his continued presence in the crowded race would only aid frontrunner Joe Morrissey. Quote, while there are other candidates who can ably fill the mayor's job duties, there is one who simply cannot. That is a controversial and divisive candidate who has received national and international negative attention. Regrettably, that candidate's selfishness and stunts only grow with the approach of Election Day. I can no longer risk splitting votes with other candidates if it means electing someone who so plainly cares only about himself. If there was ever a time we need collaborative people in City Hall to address our city's problems, now is that time. So props to Bales for dropping out. He did not make a specific endorsement. A lot of people were questioning why that was. believe it was basically to let the other front runners work that out amongst themselves. Jack Berry took in $360,000 through October, which was more than the rest of the mayoral field combined. So between him and LeVar Stoney, one of those guys, they're going to have to come to some kind of arrangement to figure out who's going to back the other and beat Morrissey. Moving on. Virginia's Department of Medical Assistance Services dropped bad news on the state budget writers this week, saying that Medicaid needs another $281 million in addition to the $9.3 billion Virginia already has budgeted for Medicaid in fiscal years 2017 and 2018. This adds to an already huge problem with the state's $1.6 billion budget deficit. Virginia has a balanced budget amendment, so they have to figure out where that money is going to come from. And there's a lot of discussion between these two articles, one on the Daily Press and the other in the Richmond Times-Dispatch, about how this all plays into the Medicaid expansion game. So past 3 years, McAuliffe has been trying to expand Medicaid. Currently, there's a 50-50 split between the state and the federal government as to who pays for Medicaid. And if Medicaid expansion would happen, then it would be 90% of the federal government, 10% of the state would be responsible for those charges. So it seems like a no-brainer that this would actually increase the case for Medicaid expansion. But both of these articles express doubts that GOP leadership in the state General Assembly is going to push back even harder on this in the coming session. So keep an ear out on that. And a couple of articles on the Virginian pilot about the Jamichael Mitchell death and the way things are handled at Virginia jails and Eastern State Medical Hospital. Mitchell, who was arrested in April of 2015, was accused of stealing $5 worth of snacks from a convenience store. He died that August in a regional jail cell that allegedly had feces on the walls and urine on the floor. This is a man who had serious mental illness. He had a court order to be transferred to Eastern State Hospital, but it was apparently lost in a desk drawer, something along those lines. And so he stayed stuck at the Hampton Roads Regional Jail where he did not get his medication, was not able to see his family, and basically lost 40 or 50 pounds over those few months before he died. Also in August of this year, Henry Stewart died at the jail, which is in Portsmouth. He had filed a number of emergency grievances asking for medical help. This is, no doubt in his mind was what had happened to Jamichael Mitchell, and had filed an emergency grievance 2 days before his death. All this led to the superintendent stepping down, and Norfolk Sheriff Bob McCade is now the interim. So there are a series of legislatural changes that want to help deal with this problem. There's been a series of investigations about this. There's a lot of questions whether the investigators even have the ability to make any changes. So Delegate Rob Bell out of Albemarle and Brian Moran, who is the State Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security, say that they want legislation that would allow state investigators to look into questionable deaths in jails throughout Virginia. The reason they say is that no state agency has the authority to conduct investigations in these cases. No state agency has looked at whether policies or procedures at the jail could have prevented either of those deaths. So this other editorial that the pilot has published basically says that there is a cover-up to the causes in Jamichael Mitchell's death. So there were reports from a subcommittee, a joint subcommittee studying Virginia's mental health systems, and a back and forth between the Office of the State Investigator General, which is OSIG, claiming that reports had been altered to make it seem that Eastern State Hospital was doing better than they were. There were admissions that the staff was dangerously overworked. I think one person in particular had worked 70-hour, 3 or 4 70-hour weeks in 1 month, and they removed all the information about this overworking. And so the pilot reports that the OSIG did not conduct its investigation into Mitchell's death with the diligence the matter deserved, and that State Inspector General June Jennings violating provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act by failing to properly respond to requests for documents that should be available for public. So this is all stemming from a whistleblower complaint, apparently someone who works at the Eastern State Hospital. So the Virginia pilot closes by saying it's unlikely that the Joint Subcommittee to Study Mental Health Services will get to the bottom of this issue. In fact, it's difficult to know what should come next beyond a detailed and thorough investigation of what happened here and an explanation from the OSIG as to why the potential conflicts were omitted from the reports. And again, basically, so these two articles are tied together because on the one hand, they're saying that, nothing's going to happen from this because no one's willing to take responsibility for it. And then on the other hand, these legislators want to pass laws that will allow state investigators to investigate these matters in the future. So in addition to Stewart and Mitchell, there's also been other reports of other people who have died in Virginia jails or mental health care hospitals for various reasons. There was one man who was arrested. I don't have his name handy in front of me, but basically was arrested, couldn't make $150 bail and basically had a stroke or had a heart attack while he was in the jail system. So just very, very sad. And really an outrage, miscarriage of justice. That it seems that nothing will come of it, I suppose. I mean, we've had the superintendent step down, but no one else has had any accountability or responsibility for what went on at the jail in these several deaths. So we'll keep you tuned if anything changes otherwise. We're going to take a real quick break. We'll be right back with our interview with Gina Maglionico of the AFL CIO. We'll be right back. This Tuesday, when Virginians go to the poll, they'll be voting on two constitutional amendments. The first is Amendment 1, the so-called Right to Work Amendment. This week's interview concerns that amendment. Here it is. Okay, we're on the phone with Gina Maglionico. You're with the AFL CIO, I believe you're communications, is right?
Yeah, it's Gina Maglionico, Communications Director with the Virginia AFL CIO.
And how long have you been with them?
I have been here in Virginia for about 2 years.
And what did you do before that?
I have actually been with the AFL CIO in different locations, different states, since 2009.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so we wanted to talk about Amendment 1, Right to Work for Less, as I like to call it, amendment on the state constitution. Gina, tell us why people should vote no on Amendment 1.
Yeah, so, here at the Virginia AFL CIO, we're actually opposed to this amendment on a whole bunch of reasons. But most importantly, and, definitely what we've been talking about, because this thing has nothing to do with rights. A constitution, by definition, is, designed to, A, set up a framework for how government is supposed to function, right? And B, is supposed to protect the rights of citizens. This amendment has nothing to do with rights. It's also already a law that is in the Code of Virginia and really doesn't belong anywhere near our Constitution at all, period. Certainly we don't take amendments to the Constitution lightly, especially when they're bad policies. But, just think about what that does. If you open up the Constitution of Virginia for this piece of code, where does it stop?
Right.
And, that certainly creates opportunity for all kinds of clutter and extra junk in the Constitution that, waters down the whole principle, the whole point of having a document like this.
This would probably be the first instance of a constitutional amendment being used to govern how private companies operate. Is that correct?
That's correct. Sure. I mean, there's no doubt that the purpose of a right-to-work law has nothing to do with rights. They are meant to union bust, period. So what we hear from a lot of folks is, it's kind of a misnomer. The term right to work sounds like it's probably going to be a good thing. Of course, everybody wants the ability to get up in the morning, have a job, go to work, and be able to provide for their families. Well, that's not what these laws do. By federal law, no one can be forced to join a union. But federal law also says that when a union is voted into a workplace, that union is going to represent all of the employees there, not just the ones who choose to be dues-paying members. So what a right-to-work law does says that union cannot recoup any of the costs. It cannot collect any sort of fee from those people who choose to be non-members, but are still receiving the benefits and services. Things like a union will go and negotiate the contract to enforce a contract. They may administer benefits and pension plans.
I've got family members who have actually... Sorry, I was just going to mention I've got family members who have actually received like tens of thousands of dollars in back pay from a union case involving overseas travel, and they weren't a member of the union. So yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying there. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt though.
No, you're fine. Yeah, it's not uncommon for unions to expend large quantities of resources and very high dollar amounts. Legal fees add up fairly quickly when you're representing someone in a grievance procedure.
And unfortunately, these laws have been very, very effective in doing what they were designed to do.
Absolutely.
Do you think that this push in Virginia is part of a larger movement by other conservative states or anti-union PACs or whatever we'll have you? Do you think this is part of a coordinated effort across the country that Virginia is just a part of right now?
It seems to be. There are all sorts of higher priority items that our elected officials could and should be focused on. But they're choosing to play this political game that puts their corporate campaign donors and other corporate interests at a higher priority than Virginia's working families. Certainly, we have seen the trend in recent years. There are a number of states throughout the Midwest that have recently adopted right-to-work laws. And I believe it's Alabama is also facing the exact same constitutional amendment this year. It will be on their ballot on Election Day as well. So, yeah, I would certainly agree that this is part of a larger effort.
So we'd like to thank Gina for giving us time for that interview this week. I'm sure she's very busy. The Pilot has a nice article about the whole right to work situation that was published earlier this week. Just missed it until now, but just to paraphrase a couple paragraphs out of it, the Republicans who control both houses of the General Assembly say the proposed constitutional amendment is necessary because a future legislature might repeal the law. Democrats say it's an attack on workers and unnecessary because apparently no lawmaker has proposed changing the law in the nearly 70 years it's been on the books. So no matter how you feel about right to work, this amendment will not change anything come next year. Right to work will still be the law of the land. The only thing it will prevent is us changing it in the future. And a little bit of background about why this is happening is because Attorney Mark Herring, who's our Commonwealth's attorney, has joined in an amicus brief in a California case before the U.S. Supreme Court about whether public employee unions should continue to collect fees from non-members. And because the Supreme Court deadlocked, the Circuit Court of Appeals ruling standard, which allowed the fees. And so Mark Obenshain, who I'll also talk about in a little bit, said Herring's action was not his main motivation for sponsoring the bill, but provided an example of a Virginia official seeking to upend current state law. So I think they see the writing on the wall about this, or, this is obviously a union busting law, as we stated, and Obenshain and other pro-business General Assembly members are trying to prevent us from doing anything in the future to undo this. So we here at For Virginia urge you to vote no on that. If you look at the wording of the bill itself when you go into the voting booth, or if you go on Ballotpedia and look at this, the wording of the bill itself is so confusing. I've talked to dozens of people about this on Facebook and face-to-face, and a lot of people are confused about this and how to vote. So it's important that we frame it as right to work for less. Virginia is a right to work state and has been for 70 years. And this is basically Republican General Assembly members trying to prevent the people from changing this law in the future. So that's the gist of the matter. And we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back with some news about marijuana, some big news of marijuana this week. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. And we're back with the For Virginia podcast. This is Michael Brandon Wade. Thanks for listening. A little bit of environmental news for this week regarding Dominion and Virginia's Department of Environmental Quality, the DEQ. This week, Dominion and the DEQ proposed a $260,000 fine for 2 oil spills that fouled public waters in January. Now, we've got 2 articles about this, one from Richmond Times-Dispatch, the other from the Daily Progress, and the 2 are kind of in conflict about who is proposing this fine. So it appears that Dominion actually proposed it and that the DEQ is trying to determine whether or not they're going to do that. I'm having a hard time figuring out between these two what's actually going out. So the fact of the matter is that there's a consent order out for public comment for 30 days, and then it'll go to the State Water Control Board for action in December. So basically what happened, there's 2 instances here. So there was a 13,500 gallon spill from a Crystal City substation into a waterfowl sanctuary in the Potomac River. The Crystal City incident began January 24th when mineral oil spilled from a transformer at Dominion Substation in Arlington County. A week later, oil was seen in the nearby Roaches Run Waterfowl Sanctuary in the Potomac River near Reagan National Airport. So we are talking about mineral oil, not crude or coal ash or anything like that. So mineral oil is apparently non-toxic. I mean, don't go drinking this stuff. We don't recommend that. So Dominion recovered 11,000 gallons. They spent $4.2 million on the response, remediation, and restoration in Arlington. And then this other article that we have from the Daily Progress says that a mineral oil discharge from a transformer on Churchville Avenue on a tributary of Bells Creek. So correction, I'm not sure that the other one actually does refer to mineral oil or not. But again, these 2 articles are trying to figure out the information between the 2 of them. I'm sorry, I'm not making a lot of sense right now. But there's another one where it's talking about some cattle affected because the ground was soiled. According to Dominion, they excavated the contaminated soil and is reseeding the affected farm area to grow grass and has to demonstrate to the DEQ by May of next year that the soil has been stabilized. So this is the mineral oil. Apparently a transformer overloaded into a grassy area. And here, confirmation again from the Daily Progress that the January discharge was also mineral oil as well. So the to break that down, the fine itself, they're proposing is $259,000 and change for the fine, and then $6,000, just under $6,000 for reimbursement of the investigation costs. Now, according to Richmond Times, the proposed fine could have reached $1.3 million, and they based the fine by the spill's impact. So again, Dominion and the Environmental Agency are recommending this fine, and then it's out for public comment for 30 days. Now, let me tell you what you can do about it. According to the Bay Journal, the DEQ will take public comments on its agreement with Dominion before finalizing the enforcement action. Comments may be submitted through November 30th by email to Lee Crowell at deq.virginia.gov. Let me repeat that. Lee, Lee.Crowell, Crowell, at deq.virginia.gov. Or postal mail to P.O. Box 1105, Richmond, Virginia, 23219. So you can submit your public comments to Mr. Crowell about whether you think the $260,000 fine to Dominion Power is sufficient for these 2 oil spills. Keep it civil, please. That's all I have to say. And also, before we wrap this section up, not going to get into it too much, but there is a op-ed in the Washington Post that I'm linking to by Pat Tiller, who spent 30 years with the National Park Service, and it's about the transmission towers near Jamestown. Mr. Miller is heavily against the proposed transmission lines, and wants you to take a look at it and read it. It's a call to action to voice your opposition to this project as well. Instead of putting these lines in, there are other ways that we can meet our energy challenges, aka solar power. We'll get into that in another week. But check out that editorial, and again, send your emails to Mr. Lee Crowell at the DEQ, telling them what you think about this $260,000 fine. So we'll take a quick break. We'll be back with our fame and shame for the week. In the state of Virginia, there was no bigger news in the past few months than a reversal by Senate Majority Leader Tommy Norment Jr. of Williamsburg, who says that he supports studying the decriminalization of marijuana. Norment, who's co-chair of the State Senate Committee for Courts of Justice, along with Harrisonburg Senator Mark Obenshain, his other co-chair. In the past 2 years, there have been a number of bills submitted by Alexandria Senator Adam Ebbin to decriminalize possession of small amounts of marijuana. Mr. Ebbin's bills would have removed the $500 criminal penalty, which includes 30 days in jail for up to an ounce of marijuana, possession of up to an ounce of marijuana, and would have changed that to $100 civil fine, which would be the equivalent of a traffic ticket, and so forth. Now, past 2 sessions that Ebbin has put this bill forward, the committee has passed it by, meaning that they basically have a voice vote which says that they're not going to recommend it to the floor proper, which means that nobody votes on it except for these individuals in the committee. And so we've gotten nowhere over the past 2 years on the decriminalizational effort. So Norman's saying that he thinks that it's, quote, I think it's absolutely crazy that we continue to lock people up for possession of a modest amount of marijuana, end of quote, is really a big freaking deal. Now, normally this would be great news and, I'd say, hooray. But there's two pieces of information, actually more than that, but there's two pieces of information that you need to know about this that will probably change your mind a little bit about Norman's stance, or his reversal at least. The first is a series of articles that I have in the show notes here. I'll just give you the titles of two of them. The first one from thedailycaller.com, titled 3 Biggest Reasons Tobacco Giants Eye Lucrative $50 Billion Marijuana Market. The second is Altria, Opportunity in the Market for Marijuana, ? From Forbes.com. So Altria, for those of you that don't know, is what Philip Morris calls itself after they rebranded themselves. So, Big Tobacco, first off, they changed their name to kind of drop some of the controversy surrounding all the denialism that they engaged in as Philip Morris. And so they renamed themselves, kind of disassociate themselves and rebrand and everything like that. So obviously cigarette smoking is at the lowest it's been in decades. People are giving it up for vaping. Whole nother subject on how that's getting treated. But so the tobacco market, including Altria, aka Philip Morris, is eyeing this medical and recreational marijuana as their next big business opportunity. So that's the first piece of information. The second piece of information from the Virginia Public Access Project shows that since taking office, Tommy Norment of Williamsburg has received a total of $88,433 from Altria themselves. So while marijuana proponents have spent countless hours and energy and hard-earned time and money trying to make the legalization and decriminalization arguments to Mr. Norman and Mr. Obenchain and the others on these committees, Tommy Norman decides that 2016 is the time to start looking at the issue. So for that, I have to give Mr. Norman this week's shame. And since we like to end the show on a good note, we would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone, the individuals and the organizations who are involved in protecting voter rights in this election. Specifically, Progress VA is been doing a great job. There's a couple articles about them in the Daily Pilot Online and in NBC 29 WVIR out of Richmond, who bring us news about the work that they're doing. So Progress VA organized a conference call with Reporters Monday about volunteers on Election Day answering voter questions and making sure that eligible voters aren't hindered by some of these other voter fraud groups like Judicial Watch. Arusha Gordon, who is part of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, says, quote, "We believe that an educated voter is an empowered voter, and we also believe that protecting the integrity of our election means every eligible voter gets to cast a ballot that's counted." And with all that we've seen going on, all of the rhetoric coming out of the Republican candidate for president, encouraging people to watch liberal polling places to make sure that the wrong people aren't voting, paraphrasing obviously, but voter ID laws being passed across the country, early voting hours being stripped away. It seems that the GOP has determined that if they can't win your vote through their policies and through their message, that they will take your right to vote away. And we need organizations like Progress VA, like the Virginia Civic Engagement Table, that are informing voters, are standing up for their rights to vote. And there's many others that are involved as well. I mean, individuals, people who are involved with this process, all the people that are going to be working the polls, Yellow Cab, who is going to be offering free rides to the polls for senior citizens. You know, this kind of thing that encourages participation in our democracy is what makes America great. And so we have to give a big fame to these groups and these individuals who are helping protect the integrity of our voting process. And I just want to have a little sub-note on that last portion, that if you need any help with election protection, or you see anything where people are being denied their constitutional right to vote, you can call 1-866-OUR-VOTE. That's 1-866-687-8683. The Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. So keep that number in mind if you see anything. If you can, take off the day, spend some time at your polling place, talk to people, make sure everyone knows what's going on, and keep an eye open for your fellow citizens and look out for everybody. And above all, make sure you get out and vote this Tuesday. I don't think I have to tell anybody listening to this podcast to do that. I know you're going to vote. So anyways, that's all the time we've got for this week. We appreciate everyone that tuned in. Thank you for all your support and all your shares. So please check out our website, share us on social media, and your financial support is always appreciated. This was the For Virginia Podcast, episode 12. Please submit your feedback on our website, on Facebook, or by emailing info@forvirginia.org. We'll continue working hard to bring you the news, information, and analysis to help keep the progressive revolution moving forward in Virginia through 2017. My name is Michael Brandon Wade. Thank you, and we'll see you next week. Go vote.